How you doing, friends? Ernie here, and this is the 0 Days to Expiration podcast. This is episode number 98. Only 2 more episodes until 100. Unbelievable. I have slowed down the podcast a little bit compared to the way it started, but we're going to ramp that up. Today we're going to talk about the Open Range Breakout and whether or not it's something that you can actually use in 0 DTE to determine market direction. Now, I want to be very clear here about what the Open Range Breakout is or was, how it's been supported or advertised or promoted. Now, first of all, the Open Range Breakout was a stalwart strategy for the Chicago Mercantile Exchange open floor trader, right? In the open cry, you know, the guys with the fancy coats and everything and yelling at each other. That was kind of like the standard trade for a lot of the old timers. And it went something like this. They would wait for the first 5 minutes. Sometimes they would do it for 10 minutes, but the first 5 minutes, they would see what the high and the low was. And then if it, after 5 minutes, they would give it another requisite period of time, maybe a minute or two. If it broke out of one of those highs or lows, they would go with that trade, right? And of course, you know, these guys are super short term and they don't really play very much on technical analysis or any other kind of analysis. Mainly their style of trading is whoever's yelling the loudest and whatever group is yelling the loudest and they're going in a particular direction, that's the way they go. So anyways, so that's basically how the Open Range Breakout went on the floor. Now, when the floor closed, all these traders needed to do something with themselves. They were some of the most experienced people, but their style of trade on the floor was completely different from up on the desk or behind their own personal computer. So they had to learn a new way of trading. And it was very difficult for a lot of them, most of them, as a matter of fact. A lot of them wanted to use their experience, their chops as being a floor trader for many, many years or even decades to be able to promote themselves and maybe sell a strategy, this Open Range Breakout strategy. And a lot of them did. That's, you know, it became very popular, I'd say, in the right after the big market crash in 2008, there were a bunch of people that were doing this, and they know who they are. Anyways, they would use their moniker, their experience and their years on the exchange as social proof that they knew what the hell they were talking about. And so people bought their stuff. And, maybe some people found some success with it for a period of time. Others didn't. But they had a lot of marketing muscle behind them, so they kept on pushing it, pushing. And it became a thing. And then that sort of filtered out down to other people who were doing the Open Range Breakout, who weren't floor traders, but they saw the opportunity to sell this idea to the masses and try to make a buck, right? So I always was fascinated by this because, you know, I have a lot of experience, not actually as a floor trader, but being on the floor of the exchanges because I was very involved with the development of their systems and so forth. And I'd seen a lot of these systems come through. And of course, also as a fund manager in the past, I wanted to test out these systems and whether or not they had any efficacy. And would it be something that I would want to commit real money to? So I quickly found out that no, it doesn't work in the real world. We don't have a bunch of traders, you know, sitting around us yelling at the top of their lungs, basically indicating where the market is going that I can follow. And all of the, how should I say it? All of the criteria or whatever statistics that they came up with, they were invalid. They just didn't work. Really, the reason why they made money was through their intuition, their experience on the floor, and basically following the crowd. I mean, that's basically it. But open range breakouts still exist today, and it might be a useful tool if you want to use it just for a decision-making point, but not, or a data point, but not as a thing that you're going to develop a strategy around. And I know that there are still people out there on the YouTubes that are trying to push this as a valid strategy. But just to put your mind at rest, I've done the work. I have the receipts, literally. And I can tell you this, that first of all, the open range breakout doesn't work in a variety of conditions. First of all, it does not work in any kind of market that has lower than average volatility, or lower than, say, our Goldilocks zone of volatility. Anything below 20 on the VIX, and it's completely useless. It doesn't work in a non-trending market or a sideways market. It doesn't work there either. And quite frankly, it just doesn't work. It's sporadic. Now, the way it would work in some of these newer systems is that 5 minutes was way too short of a time frame for most traders now to be able to do that breakout, because especially now with all the volatility, that would just look crazy. A 5-minute bar, it just wouldn't compute. But generally what they do is they'll look at, say, 15 minutes. Some will go as much as half an hour. And within that time frame, they would establish what the higher part of the range and the lower part of the range was. Then after that time frame has completed, that 15 minutes or whatever it is, they would give it another 5 minutes to see if it would break out. Now, if it broke out within that 5-minute period above the higher end of the range or below the lower end of the range, they would go with that trade. If whatever time frame or bar that they were using closed above or below the range. So those are all the conditions. And if it didn't happen, then they wouldn't take it. They would also set their stop as being the other end of the range, which is crazy in a market like today, when that range today was, let's see, from 85, 30 points. You're going to set a 30-point stop on the E-mini S&P futures. That's crazy. So anyways, now you get in the point that, first of all, these numbers or this range or time frame that they used was not necessarily arbitrary. It was those numbers or that system or whatever system, whoever is hawking it at the time, they claim that they did all the statistical look backs and tried to figure out what was the optimal time to set a range and the optimal time to see how long it lasted before they would see if it broke out, all based on statistical averages. Now, here's something you should know. If you're trading by statistical averages, you are a fool, an absolute fool. Statistical averages will get you nowhere. You will be a loser, 100%. It's as simple as that. A statistical average does not tell you what's happening right now. It does not. There was a passage in a Nassim Taleb book, I think it was in Fooled by Randomness, where where a character was talking about his mother or grandmother, and how she had a certain temperature that she felt really comfortable in, and she wanted to live in a place where the average temperature was like 65 degrees. Now, somebody came back to this person. I can't remember the exact story, but it goes something like this. So I'm totally paraphrasing. He said, well, it is an average of 65 degrees. Sometimes it's 105 degrees, and other times it's 15 degrees. You average it out, it's about 65 degrees. And the guy says, my mother would be dead. And that's pretty much the way it is using statistics in trading. They do not help you. The statistics, even on your options platform, are based on normal distributions or averages. They do not help. You cannot trade by them, period. You cannot do it with the open range breakout either. So every day is a new day. Every day is unique among all other days. There might be a lot of similarities and different patterns that you could recognize, and that's kind of like what I'm going to talk about right now using the open range breakout. See, first of all, the length of time it takes to establish a range is variable. All right. And so that's one part that totally breaks the open range breakout theory. You can't come up with a statistical average of what a breakout or what a range will be established within. It just doesn't work. So for example, today we had a range that lasted until, let's see, until a little bit past 11:20. All right, so almost 2 hours the range lasted until it finally broke down below that point. And the span of that range, as I said before, was about 30 points. All right, so that's very different from yesterday's range, which lasted, I guess it depends on how you define what a breakout is, but let's say this is the breakout, which lasted until 12 o'clock, so 2.5 hours. And its range was from 39.71 all the way down to, its range was 42 points. All right, so let's keep on going. We'll keep on looking at ranges. All right, so this was 2 days ago. The range lasted for almost exactly an hour, just a little under an hour. And its total breadth of its range was from 39.24 to 39.42, so 18 points. Okay, so that was another range. This is all within a 3-day period, by the way. And let's see. Okay, then here's this one. Oh, this is crazy. This range lasted, I don't even know that there was a range here. I guess there was. Yeah, right here. Oh, wow. Okay. So this range lasted 23 minutes. No, 27 minutes. It lasted 27 minutes. And the total range was 67, 12 points. All right, all within the same week, all within approximately the same overall market volatility. You know, VIX was sort of in the middle in our Goldilocks zone, about 23, 24. Completely different ranges, different times that they broke out, different spreads, sizes of those ranges, all within the same kind of volatile market. Now, all right, so, okay, here's another one. This one's crazy. So this is going back to the very beginning of the week, and the range didn't break until 1:30 in the afternoon. 4 hours. But its total range was relatively small. So it was from 86 to, yeah, it was only 19 points. So, okay, so this basically takes this past week, and if you try to apply any kind of open range statistical measures, you know, to come up with some sort of standard range and breakout time and all that other stuff, you would have been a total failure. Because you relied on statistics. Now, there is still something about the open range that you can use. The first thing you have to do is throw away any idea that there's an average or that it means anything. All right. The market does, however, respect levels that have been established where there's obviously a point of resistance or a point of support. And those levels, by the way, are usually very easy to see on a volume profile because they'll show you, you know, those levels of support and resistance are usually exactly where the bottom or top of a value node is. It could also be a level of inflection, say at a low volume node or an LVN, that's what we call it, where there's a total lack of volume. And it will definitely show you those points. And that's usually where the ranges reach to or get established. But not always. I mean, but for the most part, that's where they do. And regardless of where that is important to us in evaluating whether or not there's a good chance of a breakout above the range or below the range. But basically, you can use that open range as a way to kind of learn about markets, right? And just notate the length that the range happened and under what market conditions. What's the context? Was it a sideways market? Was it trending? Was it a reversal? Was there overnight action? What was the overnight action like, et cetera? So it's completely contextual. There's no average. Every situation is completely unique. Now, how does that help you? How can every situation be completely unique? How do I come up with a trade off of that? Ernie? Oh, excuse me. Forgot to hit the burp button. How can I come up with some sort of standardized way of, taking a trade if every situation is unique? Well, I mean, I think you just answered your question. You can't. However, you can derive some idea if you sort of release the idea that you need to have some sort of statistical measure to take your box and put it around or your square peg and put it around the round hole in the market. And just take it for what it is. Just recognize that there seems to be a range or not. Sometimes there is no range when the market opens. It just goes one way or the other. And see what that range is and see how long it lasts and see whether or not there's some area where it breaks out of it. And the breakout should be pretty plain, right? Of course, that will depend a lot on the bars that you're looking at, the time frame. Sometimes a breakout isn't apparent, say with a 15-minute bar or a 30-minute bar, but completely apparent with a 3-minute bar. So you have to decide, what time frame that you're actually living in and conducting your trading and your analysis of the market. But generally for us as day traders, I think if you break it down to 3 or 5-minute bars or even 1-minute bars, you're getting a pretty good view of how the market behaves. And you'll start noticing things, especially if you go to 1 minute or 3 minute, that the market seems to have an affinity for the opening and closing of those bars right on the open and close. It will like turn around right on the minute or the 3-minute or the 5-minute. And that's not necessarily unusual because there are a lot of algorithms that are out there that are actually pegging off of the clock. And so that, you'll see that kind of thing happen from time to time. So I would just pick a time frame that works for you. I think 3 minutes is probably good, and stick with it. That way you have some sort of baseline that you can compare everything else to. Draw your box when you've discovered the high and the low of the range, and then see how long it will extend before it actually breaks out. Once it does break out, take a note about, well, how did you get into this market? Is it a very volatile market? What was the actual range prior to the market opening? What happened in the Globex market, the overnight market? Of course, this would mean that you would need to be observing the futures because the SPX or some other equity is not going to show you what's happening in the pre-market or the overnight market. And that's totally significant, I think, in terms of discovering or at least notating what the context of that particular range that day is. So these are all things that you would maybe put into your journal, when you're trying to construct a trade. And this is really what I'm leading up to. To get better at trading, you need to be able to monitor yourself. You need to understand, what is the context that got you here? Not only the market context, but also your personal context. How did you feel about that trade? What were you thinking at the time? What were the I guess, the patterns or things that you recognized in your head. Also, from an emotional point of view, I mean, were you going into it with good cheer? Were you kind of upset? Were you anxious about something? Were you tired? Were you totally awake, etc.? All these things matter in terms of your personal accounting of how you took that trade that day under those conditions. And when you take all of that together, there's going to be a pretty unique picture of what that individual trade is like. Now, of course, if you're taking hundreds of trades during a day, it's very difficult to try to record all of this data with every single trade. But if you're doing one or two trades, it's pretty easy. If you're doing a lot of trades, then you'd have to do this sort of wide wash of how you felt during that day and then record it at the end of the day, or whatever's practical. Maybe once in the afternoon and once in the later afternoon, like once at noon, once at 2 or 3 before the market closes. But if you're doing one trade a day or 2 trades a day, it's very easy to take each individual trade and then record all this information, put it into your journal. Of course, there are the standard things that you want to record about the specific trade, about the context of that trade, how wide the spread was, where the center strikes were, what's the price level, et cetera, things like that. What was the debit that I went into or the credit that I exited with, all of that stuff. And then, of course, you want to then put in what type of market it was, what day it was, obviously, because, maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Thursday make a difference in zero DTE world. I know that it's just until recently we didn't have Tuesdays and Thursdays. Is there a difference between Tuesdays and Thursdays now? Or are they blending in and just becoming just like every other day? Is Monday the same as Friday? So the reason why you're recording all this stuff is so that periodically, maybe weekly, biweekly, or monthly, you take a look at all of your journal entries and you start searching out patterns. And you see if you can associate patterns with some of the, the bad trips that you've had in your trading experience, or even the good trips, so that you can see if there's a correlation between how you acted, what the situation was with your particular performance. And over time, you're going to see these patterns emerge, and some of them will become more prominent than others. And then once you've been able to recognize that, you can then take some action that will either enhance your behavior to keep on doing a good thing, or look for triggers that will maybe set you off into a behavioral correction type of situation where you can fix the problem that you have that's getting you into a bad situation. And that's the whole purpose of journaling. It's very important. And I don't know what this is sort of what ORB is about and what I would use ORB for. And that is as another contextual thing that you could develop as another data point that you could put into your journal. So hopefully that, let's see, do we have questions here? Let's see. I think they're all just talking to themselves. But Clayton agrees with me. Thank you, Clayton. Can you show us your screen? Well, I could. Yeah, why don't I do that? All right. So, so here's one of the ranges that I was looking at. Here's today's, right? So here we have a breakout today. And it lasted until 11:24, almost 2 hours, and then it broke down. So here's yesterday. It broke up. And here is Wednesday, also broke up. And if you notice the similarity, I guess, between yesterday and Wednesday was that they both in the pre-market had this sort of sideways motion. And you had it also yesterday, but it was in a completely different context. It wasn't as compressed. I don't know if that makes a difference. And then this day was just tiny, tiny, tiny. Hardly any range at all. So they're all different. They're all completely different. And to think that you can develop an open range breakout strategy from behavior that is this diverse is just, well, it's crazy. All right. Hopefully this helps and helps you on your journey to 0- DTE strategies and learning from your performance, and tools that you can use to record the context of each individual trade. I think the ORB has some validity because it provides at least some breakdown and a way that you can analyze it easily, at least based on some things, right? Even if each individual range and breakout point are completely different from every other range, it's still something. You can see what the context of the market was leading up to it, and then what happened afterwards. You can relate that to what day it was, the volatility that was in the air at that time, and how it all kind of comes together. Of course, all of this stuff are things, what you're looking for are patterns that that you can recognize that may be or may not be repeatable, right? Or may influence your behavior next time or not. So you can learn a little bit from these past things, but don't rely on them too heavy, or try to think that you're going to come up with some sort of average. And, based on 500 trades, I know that I have to do this at 9:45 or something like that. That's just craziness. Every day is a new day. Every trade is unique. Every person is unique. And their particular attitude and, I guess, emotional content and their feeling about that trade, their analysis, is going to be somewhat unique. And treat it that way. Alrighty. Let's see, back to the big head. Hopefully that was useful. And I hope you all have a great trading day. And we'll see you next time. Peace.